questions and go right straight to the end before we close. I want to turn to those who are listening in for whom religion and sacred text is suspicious. If there is a science and a historical process behind the development of the Bible and the Dead Sea Scrolls, these are clearly issues of science and history and not necessarily involving the supernatural. In other words, the Bible can be explained very naturalistically without invoking God or the supernatural. Okay, Ron, here's to see if you can do the impossible. Can you respond to this in 3 minutes?
Respond to what in specifically? Whether science has made the Bible no longer supernatural?
Yes, because you can explain it very naturalistically, right?
Okay.
Without invoking God. So does it remain sacred? So can you do this in 3 minutes?
Well, the idea of sacred and the idea of supernatural were terms used, but they were not terms that were crucial to the first ideas of belief in God in the beginning. In fact, to believe in God begins with belief in nature, not in supernature, interestingly enough. Because if you do not know what is nature, you cannot know what is supernature. So when someone says, I'm going to perform a miracle, the miracle makes sense only if you know what is a non-miracle. If you don't know what is a non-miracle, a miracle isn't very impressive. So the idea of anything called miracles has to do with understanding it. Number two, if you recall in the New Testament, Jesus famously, when people kept asking for another miracle, he called them a perverse generation, which is a striking thing that we're too embarrassed to mention in sermons. But the reality was, Jesus himself was not taken up by constant miracle because he knows you perform a miracle, they will worship the miracle and they will not worship God. That's one thing. For me personally, when you study the universe, the whole universe is the miracle. It's incredible miracle. Now, so what do we mean by miracle? We mean suspension of natural laws is what we really mean. If we ask the question, what if we have achieved in our human mind to the level where almost everything about God, we no longer need to rely on miracles because science has given us explanation? I think that is the greatest of all miracles, that God has given us a human mind to be able to get that far. Along the way, even within the Old and New Testament, as people knew more, God did not stop progress at all. God could have stopped it and said, nope, your brain has reached a certain matter. It's too dangerous. I want you to know. If you look at the Genesis text on Adam and Eve, the story of Adam and Eve, what was the great objection that was a concern, including building the Tower of Babel? It was knowledge. It was knowledge. It wasn't knowledge in its own sake. It was that the knowledge will replace God. It is not that miracles are important. So when we ask the question, now that we know so much more, are there no more miracles to believe in? Actually, science is full of miracles in the sense that they are inexplicable expressions of phenomena. We do not know what's happening. I mentioned in the book about dark matter and dark energy in space, right? They remain incredible miracles. In fact, the scientists will tell you, the more we learn how much we don't know. We just can't explain it. If that is the definition of miracle, that's good enough for me. But if a miracle can be an obstacle to God, and this sounds strange, right? Yes, miracles can be obstacles to God, where the focus is on, can I have another magic show? Another magic show. If you look at someone has studied, I think a guy called Donald Capps, he studied the healings of Jesus, and he asked, what did Jesus do mechanically to heal the person, to tell a Samaritan man, go and sin no more? So much of it is psychoanalysis. So much of it is understanding the human mind. So much of it is knowing the social context of the person. Very little of it has to do with changing physics. Very interesting. People, you would have thought that's a change in physics and chemistry, right? We don't have any evidence of that in the Bible itself. Sorry.
So let me close at least with this thought. You know, I find that people imagine that criticisms about religion is something outsiders of the Judeo-Christian faith do. What I discovered is actually the reverse, that it is actually the very people in the Bible who dare to question God and to raise very uncomfortable questions. They are also the first to raise the question about human suffering. I mean, for example, in Genesis, you have Abraham asking God, why does a just God about to do unjust things. If you are a just God, why are you about to do those things, right? Habakkuk does the same thing. We have a whole book in the Bible, the book of Job, dedicated to why God allows human suffering. And pretty much it's a book of questioning God. In short, having doubts and asking questions is not a reflection of weak faith, but they are the elements, I believe, of a growing faith. And that, by the way, is the classic definition of theology. It is faith seeking understanding, meaning that for faith to grow deep, it must ask good questions and seek understanding. So, this closing thought, you introduced a very, very valuable expression to me years ago that I introduced to my own church. It is the term theological safe space. It is to create a space that invites people. It doesn't matter whether you have a faith or religion or not. We invite one another to ask questions, even the most difficult and even the most uncomfortable ones. That has become part of our church life here in San Diego. And thank you for that, Ron. And even in this conversation, this is a safe space to invite open conversation. So thanks to you, Ron, for this opportunity for both of us to express faith. And I want to hand it over to Christine. Christine, any final words?
Yeah, thank you so much, Andre and Ron. We do have a question from the audience. Carol had posed a question. Is there anything in the Dead Sea Scrolls relative to the Muslim faith, which also claims Abraham as a prophet?
By definition, the Dead Sea Scrolls predate Islam by almost 600 years. So it has no reference to Islam as a faith. If you're asking the question, is the Muslim world legitimate in claiming Ibrahim, the idea of Abraham, as the father? Absolutely legitimate, because the story of Muhammad is very much a story of Christianity in a strange way, because Muhammad didn't go out to look for a new religion. He was living at a time where Saudi Arabia was peppered with a lot of Jewish communities. One of them was Medina itself. Medina was a very powerful and rich Jewish world, and there were Christians all along the western coast of what we call Saudi Arabia. In fact, there was an earlier war called the War of the White Elephants between Christians and the Arabs. There were no Muslims that are called the Arabs in that part of the world, between Ethiopia, which is a Christian kingdom. When Muhammad had his visions, and he attributed it to the angel Jibril or Gabriel, who did he consult? He consulted his wife's uncle, who was a Christian, an Arab Christian. And the wife's uncle told him, this is a revelation from the God of the Yahuda, the Jews, the same God, Moses. So listen to it. And that was the starting point of Islam. And the attribution for Muhammad was, he then proclaimed, now we know that God also loves us. What's interesting about Islam was, it didn't arise because someone wanted to create a new religion. It arose because the Bedouins in Arabia, they felt cheated of inheritance. They were outcasts. They were not allowed to go to churches. They were not allowed to join the Jews in their worship. They were considered inferior, partly because of misunderstanding of a text in the Bible about the role of the children of Ishmael. Because in the Bible, it says, you will also be a mother of 12 tribes. But Christians conveniently just ignore that bit. The Jews also kind of ignored that bit. So the tragedy of the Arab peoples, the Bedouins, was when he discovered that, there was great rejoicing, not because they founded a new religion. It was a great rejoicing because they now know that God did not play favorites. And the development of Islam pushed that ideal very hard. By the time you go to Mecca for the pilgrimage, you see everybody is in white. They wanted to say, once you come before God, there's egalitarianism. No one knows how rich you are. There's no jewelry. There's no fancy jeans to say you're so and so. And which is why some of the Christians who converted to Islam, famously Malcolm X, those of us who study theology will be aware of his situation. When he faced so much racism in America as a Black person, he went to Mecca. He didn't join the Islamic world because he preferred their theology. He joined it because he felt welcome as a human being. in a way he didn't feel welcome in Christian America. So that's the long story about Muhammad and his connection to Christianity. Many scholars, and I regard myself as one of those, who regard Islam as an attempt of a reformation of Christianity in the same way that Christianity was an attempt at reforming Judaism. That's why Muslims regard the Injil, the New Testament, in high regard. You may or may not know this, but Muhammad is called the last prophet, but the greatest prophet is Jesus. They regard Mary in high regard because Mary, was the mother of Jesus. They were not discussing his divinity. They were discussing the fact that he performed miracles, he did all kinds of stuff, and Muhammad was derivative of Jesus, something a lot of modern Muslims also conveniently do not want to mention. But Muhammad himself when he was first attacked by the people in Mecca, where did he go? He found refuge in the Christian kingdom of Ethiopia. So that's this incredible interplay between the early Arabs, the pre-Islamic Arabs, and Christianity in that area. And that's why I spent so much time in the Saudi Arabian peninsula. My desire is to go to Oman and to Saudi Arabia soon. And also when I went to Ethiopia, it was to understand that context, because Ethiopia celebrates the Queen of Sheba. Ethiopia celebrates their medieval king Menelik II as in the heritage of the only son of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. So all these stories come into play, and that's a lot of my work involves getting these stories together and weaving it together into a narrative to see which are tenable, which are likely to be mythological, but in any case, all myths carry a very powerful historical truth. They may be embellished, they may be exaggerated the way we do it today. We all exaggerate all kinds of truth that we have. But part of the scholar's work is to be detached enough to say, this is what we can say for sure as much as we can. This is what we can say to be likely. This is what we can say to be unlikely. And that's the task of biblical scholars today as well.
Okay, next question is from Daniel Chen. His question is, if science can explain so much about this world, why is religion still necessary?
Andre, this is also part of your world, so
I know. Andre, say something.
Science and theology. I like a line from a rabbi. His name is Jonathan Sachs. He says that science takes things apart to see how they work, but religion puts things together to see what they mean. They both aim at different things, very important things in life. So, for example, science is about explanation, analysis, breaking things into their component parts, whereas religion is about integration of different parts. Science describes, while religion tells us what ought to be. Notice that they focus on different things. So science, for example, is impersonal. By definition, it is objective, but religion is deeply personal. So, for example, Genesis focuses on who makes the universe, who made the universe, right? Science is still trying to figure out the how. So both disciplines have different purposes that complement each other. As Francis Bacon famously said, that God has written two books, the book of nature and the book of scripture. So they both have their proper and important place in our lives. Hope that helps. That's just a very quick summary there.
Thank you. Oh, is Christine still there?
I am. I'm just wondering if you want to answer that question too.
Yeah, I'll just make a few statements about that, partly because the reason I began to study the sciences in the early 80s because I was fascinated by science. It had nothing to do with God and religion. And I remember when I was first told about biological evolution, my instinct was it can't be true because the Bible doesn't say it to be so. Now, I've since understood the purpose of the Bible and the purpose of science. The reason why science continue and will continue to need guidance from belief in God more and more is because, and I wrote a book on this, it's called The Question of Origins. I wrote it in 2010. Some of you have that book. And I talked about the origin of the universe, the origin of life, and the origin of man, humanity. By that I mean humanity. And it's interesting, when you look at what modern sciences have, all three questions have hit a roadblock. In every case of these so-called origin studies, the sciences have become philosophical. They have ceased to become experimental. You can't experiment on something that is a single event that happened in the past. You can't replicate it. You can only look at it and say, how can we guess what happened going backward? And what happened in the 19th century was, and into the early 20th century, all three sciences, biology, physics, and chemistry, began to evolve a whole new branch called the philosophy of science, philosophy of chemistry, philosophy of biology, and philosophy of physics. It's a very convenient way of not saying theology, but in fact, it is a theological enterprise. Because when you look at philosophy, going back in Western philosophy, going back to the Greeks, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, they are constantly using the word God or gods. They're all trying to find out how to be a virtuous person. Greek philosophy has always been about God. It's just that by the 19th century, there was a reaction against it, and it sort of tapered down the influence of the term God in Western philosophy. But you take that away, there's nothing. In fact, when I went to study medieval philosophy at Princeton, one of the questions I asked was, why for 1,000 years, from 500 to 1500 AD, constantly all the philosophers in Western Europe referred to God? And the professor said, you take away God, you do not have medieval philosophy. Very interesting. And medieval philosophy is so important because it bridges the gap between the church fathers and the modern world of science. So this bridge is all about God. I don't think belief in God's ever going to go away. I think what's going to go away are theological cobwebs, and I hope to be part of that process, where we sweep away things that has nothing to do with God, but has to do with the influence of politics, the influence of economics, the influence of power grabs coming in to shape it. Some of the dastardly things that came up with these cobwebs are the justification of slavery, for example, the justification of all kinds of terrible wars. One example is South Africa and the Boer War and all that. Everyone's quoting scripture. That's amazing. They were quoting scripture as they killed each other and they killed the weaker people. And so quoting the Bible is one of the most dangerous things you can do if you do not know it, but it's always been done. So,
I just want to throw in a final thought to that also. Peter Berger, the sociologist from Boston U, since passed, he once predicted that the world would be getting more secular, right? Said that in the 70s. And then in the 90s, he reversed his statement, right, to say that globally we are actually becoming more religious. So you are not going to remove religion out of the world for the simple fact that religion answers the kinds of questions you are asking every single day, like who am I? How should I live? And all of that. Science doesn't say anything about those things at all. So it is deeply personal, deeply existential. So religion is here to stay. And apparently, at least in sociology, we are told that it is actually getting more intense.
Remember what we said, Andre, a few days ago in a discussion about, and I think we mentioned to Christine, when you talk about any other topic, from science to history to politics, you may get a bit personal, but yeah, you can have a drink after that. You disagree on religion, all bets are off. The knives can come out. People get, and you give a very good reason. It is so endemic in the human enterprise. It cuts so deep. People are willing to die for religious beliefs in the way they're not willing to die for chemistry or die for the stock market and stuff like that. So do you want to mention a bit of what you said, why you told us why religion is such high stakes in the world of knowledge, more than any other field of knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, that is true. Again, it is an existential issue. We need to know how to live every single day. And it provides rituals for us to keep us going. Now, we never got to our discussion about the dark sides of religion. We'll probably devote a future podcast for something like that. Yes, there are dark sides to religion. As Swami Vivekananda, the very famous Hindu writer and I would say theologian, he said that religion provides and motivates the deepest love known to mankind, while at the same time eliciting the worst hatred. So religion, because it is so deeply personal, can do both. So it is really incumbent on believers from different religions to highlight and do the best to I think focus on the best of what it can do and to minimize the dark sides, which is what Ron and myself are trying to do. There's a line I always use with Ron. I say, anyone can smell a rotten egg, few can lay a better one, right? It is easy to smell all the horrible things about religion, but a little bit more difficult to actually construct a better one, right? So our task as theologians in the marketplace of ideas is to actually put forward a religion that is worthy of our humanity, a religion that is worthy of who we are and the best of who we are.
Great. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Are there any more questions, Christine?
Yes.
Oh,
there is a question from Steve. A few statements here. So he's asking, is it somewhat true Jesus went to India in his missing years? He noticed that there are many similar teachings in Jesus' sayings and Hindu Vedanta. Please explain Jesus' decades of missing years not recorded in the Holy Bible.
Since you asked, Steve, in 2017, I made my way from northern Pakistan following the footsteps of the Apostle Thomas down to Islamabad, and then went to Amritsar, the golden temple of the Sikhs. And from there, I went to Kashmir in my quest to find that one shrine that has been, that the Muslims in the 19th century, one group of Muslims declare is the tomb of Jesus. An interesting thing, right? So I went there as a scholar, not as a confessional Christian, to find out, just to find out, not there to preach to anybody, not there to counter anybody. What did I find there? Number one, if you're asking, is there any archaeological or physical evidence of Jesus' body in the shrine? Number one, if we find any DNA, by definition, we cannot confirm or disconfirm because we have nothing to compare with. DNA is all about comparison. So you can find a human person, and you may even say this human person is from Jerusalem. You may even say Jerusalem in the 1st century. Actually, you can't get that detail, but supposing you can, you cannot confirm it. Is it possible for someone to have walked physically from Jerusalem to Kashmir? Yes. As far as we know, the Apostle Thomas went as far as southern India. So that's not the issue. Why did the Muslims in the 19th century take that view? And not all Muslims, a very tiny sect of Islam took that view. Not because they didn't like Christianity, but because they so revered Jesus, they cannot imagine why would God send someone so fantastic only to have him die after such a very short ministry? It must remain, from the point of view of archaeology, an agnostic position. We cannot confirm, we cannot deny it. On the level of, as a confessional Christian, where does that leave us, right? The interesting thing about the Jesus story is, it really is a matter of faith, because no Christian can give any physical evidence of this person called Jesus. What we have are circumstantial evidence. Where do we get it from? We get it from mostly outside the Bible. We get it from the Roman historians, Pliny the Younger especially, and Tacitus. Someone may say, yeah, but I want something beyond the Bible. Do you know, in the world of history and the world of archaeology, the Bible is as legitimate as anything ever written in the history of writing. Because to have so many writers spread over 1,500 years to write the story of the Jewish people, not with matching identity, but with substantial coherence, is almost never heard of. Never heard of. People study Roman period, which is a much shorter period. What Caesar said, what Seneca said, and all that, it doesn't match so neatly, but the Bible does. So from the view of statistical matching, it's almost as good as you get. You can't get that any further. If you're asking another question, will future science ever determine that Jesus didn't die on the cross as the New Testament stated it? Very unlikely, for the simple reason that there's no way of identifying the body of Jesus, or anyone for that matter, unless you have a set of DNA at a time to say this is the match, and that's what I get. So when people say, in that context, Ron, what do you say to people who say the story of Jesus, story of Moses, the story of Jeremiah is not true? I kind of smile because I realize that person doesn't understand the context of what is the word truth and what is the term of archaeology. How do we know things? Interestingly enough, in the narrative of Jesus, he never once gave proof or evidence. He just said it as it is, and you either take it or you don't. If you want to have a counterfactual, then you must show positive evidence that you have a reason to believe Jesus was in Kashmir. I did my due diligence so that no one can say Ron Choong as a scholar refused to go to Kashmir to see what's happening. I did that so that I can say, yes, I went there and I found the evidence lacking, that there really isn't any evidence, but there's a storyline of it. That's as far as it goes, Steve. But good question.
He actually has a follow-up question. He's interested to know how Jesus spent his long time during the unrecorded years. What are the latest research developments to address this matter?
I think I mentioned in the book that archaeology is the only source of new data after the apostles died. Everything else was guessing. To also guess what Jesus did before or after his ministry has to be in the realm of guessing because we do not have data. We just don't have data at all. But that's true of just about everyone. We do not know a lot of things about Napoleon, for example, and that's 18th century and 19th century. So there's not even there. There are people who speculate, they try to figure out what he did, but until we find physical data, it remains a speculative exercise.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's it for tonight. I don't see any more questions. It's 9:31. We started at 8 p.m. here in New York and Toronto. So, I mean, thank you so much, Ron and Andre, for this enlightening conversation. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope that you found today's session to be informational. Now, the edited recording of this session will be available on our Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, as well as on our website, actministry.org. We will also be sending the recording in our next newsletter. So if you haven't yet subscribed, please do so on our website. So that's it. Thank you so much. Good night and have a great long weekend for those of you who are in North America.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Good night.